Welcome to this IANA webinar, Asset Intelligence, How Intermodal Asset Tracking is Creating Smarter, More Well-Utilized Equipment. I'm Hal Pollard, the Director of Education at IANA, and it's great to have you with us. This is the first in our new Business Intelligence Service series of webinars. I'd like to thank our series sponsor, BlackBerry Radar, for their support. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. Keith Crenshaw, the AVP of Procurement and Pricing at Matson Logistics, and Christopher Platt, the SVP and General Manager at BlackBerry Radar. Now, let's get started.
Yeah, thanks, Hal. Hi, this is Keith Crenshaw with Matson Logistics. Just real briefly, a little background. Matson Logistics is a multimodal provider of domestic and international intermodal services, highway brokerage, warehousing, and supply chain services. We're also part of Matson Navigation, a leading U.S. ocean carrier in the Pacific, servicing Hawaii, Guam, Alaska, China, and the South Pacific. As for me, I've been with Matson for 15 years, and I have overall accountability for our private 53-foot container program. And as a reference for our discussion, Matson just recently implemented asset intelligence technology on our 53-foot private container fleet. Christopher, you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Hal. My name is Christopher Platt. I'm with BlackBerry Radar. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to the IANA group for joining us. It's really about you today. We hope to bring you some valuable information to share that can help you with your business. I've been in the transportation sector for longer than I care to talk about sometimes. I've been in different sectors, in LTL, in truckload sector, in air freight sector, but I love this intermodal business. For the past 20 years, I've been in the technology sector, helping companies successfully deploy technology to improve their business. So it's not about the technology as much as it is about what can the technology do to help you improve your business. I'm glad to represent BlackBerry Radar, great company, great legacy history. Hopefully you can find out more about us online, or I'll give my contact information at the end. But really glad to be a part of IANA and this intermodal sector, where I believe there's a lot of opportunities for technology within this sector, whether it's on the trucking side, the container, the chassis. It's a great sector, and glad to be here. And Keith's going to talk about some great ways of how they've implemented the solution to help improve their business. And so let's dig into the meat of it. Let's get to it. Again, the subject is really around asset intelligence, which is more than just asset tracking. So the way the technology has changed, it's more than just the tracking of your asset. And that asset, again, being a container, a chassis, a trailer, a truck. A lot can be done with intelligence built around the tracking of it, but there's also more to it as the technology gets built out. Assets are becoming smarter and better utilized, and that's the whole goal of asset management and asset intelligence. So, just to kind of take a step back and look at the typical industry challenges, some things haven't changed in our industry over the past 30 years, and that is that it's a highly competitive business. And as transportation and logistics providers, we're always looking for ways to differentiate our service offerings to customers. With a lot of pressure being put on us to commoditize our offerings, our job is to look at how do we differentiate the services we provide to our customers, how do we add value, how do we improve our service to our customers. That has not changed in the industry, as well as the focus on reducing costs and improving efficiencies. There's constant pressure from the consumers to the BCOs to the shippers, the carriers, constant pressure on us to reduce costs, and that comes from improving efficiency, improving utilization, as well as just reducing the cost of the services itself. So those things are constants in our industry, and we'll talk about one thing that has changed, and that's the ability for technology to address these issues and these challenges. So there's also the macro challenges within our industry around changing demand and capacity crunch, whether it's tariffs or congestion on the roads or general economic changes. There's big factors that affect our industry overall, including things like ELD, driver retention and satisfaction, the changing dynamics within the driver pool, some of the pressures on fleets to keep drivers. So those industry challenges persist, and all of them can be addressed through effective use of technology. So I mentioned that some things haven't changed over the past years, but things that have changed dramatically are the advances in technology. So 30 years ago, an in-cab communications device was $4,000 and $70 a month per truck. So the cost of technology now is a fraction of that, while at the same time, the capabilities of the technology have increased dramatically. So where GPS wasn't even available 30 years ago, now GPS, we all have it in the palm of our hands. It's ubiquitous, and it's changed how we do business in the transportation industry. It's readily available. It's lower cost. The advancement of cellular communications has changed dramatically over the years, where the coverage was not broad enough to deploy cellular 15 years ago. Now the coverage is ubiquitous with cellular coverage. Data plans have changed dramatically. So not only have the costs gone down, the volume of data capabilities have gone up. So the ability to impact business through advancements and changes in technology has changed dramatically, to the point where now the price point is at a level where it's effective, I believe, across the entire industry for almost any asset. I just believe that in the near future, every asset will have some kind of tracking device on it. The ROI is so strong, the payback, the ability for us here on this call to improve the supply chain, the effectiveness and our ability to deliver for our customers can improve dramatically through the effective use of technology. So just to talk about that a bit more, it's gone from in-cab to now trailer tracking, container tracking, chassis tracking. It's cost effective. The prices have dropped to the point, and the build out of the solutions has been dramatic as well. The ability to take just location data and build value around that for things like dwell time, for turn times, to build data and get more analytics and value out of what was just basic tracking has also improved dramatically to provide more value to those that can effectively deploy technology solutions. So, just a quick review, and if you are looking at asset tracking or in some stage of analyzing, deploying a solution, or you have, you know that there's the three components you have to take into consideration. There's the piece of hardware that goes on the asset, and I've listed out some of the things you can see on the webinar relative to reliability. The other thing that's changed technically is the ability to deploy sensors more cost effectively than in the past, and then to tie in sensors into a hub device around an asset. So there's a number of things that you should take into consideration when selecting a device, including things like install time, complexity, how is the device powered, all the things that are important in just a hardware component. Then, of course, I mentioned just briefly about the data communication, the volumes, the cost has gone down dramatically, the frequency of the updates. But also, I think in the future, it has to be taken into consideration security in the deployment of solutions for our industry. With the cyber attacks that are happening around the world and happening more frequently, security needs to be something we think about in the data security as well as the communication security for our communications going forward. It's important for our industry. So, and then the third component, of course, are the visual dashboards, the uptime, how simple are the solutions to deploy, how robust are the reporting and analytic systems available from solution providers like Radar. So I just ask and give you some things to consider when you look to acquire or change a provider or look to deploy a solution. So I'll just add the comment that There's really two parts I ask you to think about, and one is for any technology solution to be effective, the data, you have to have accurate and reliable data. So any successful deployment has to have accurate and reliable data, and then it's a matter of what you do with the data and the information, what you get. It's not about the technology, it's a matter of what you're going to do with the information, and Keith will talk about that. But our goal is as solutions providers to make sure that you have accurate and timely information, that the data is in customer discussions and negotiations. So we actually provide you data that helps you with differentiating your services by providing you information in your customer and in your vendor discussions. What was the dwell time at the location? Particularly in the intermodal sector, I understand that, the turn times in the terminals, dwell times at the ports, how long are customers hanging on to your chassis? Is there unauthorized use of your asset? Those are the kind of things that asset visibility can help you with. So when you're looking to reduce costs, one of the first things you can look at and what you need to know is what's the utilization of your current assets. There's always pressure on asset-owning transportation companies to buy more assets. We need more assets to serve our customers. We need more trailers, more containers, more chassis. Well, what's the effective utilization of your current asset pool? Are you at 20% utilization? And how effective are you in your cargo loading capabilities? So another form of utilization is, are my containers being loaded to capacity? Are my containers currently loaded full, or are they at 50% of capacity? Are my line haul trailers being used at 70% of capacity over a 30-day period or more? So that's the kind of data that you can get from an asset intelligent device to help you improve the utilization of your services. So with that kind of information, you can do things like reduce unauthorized use, automate and streamline some of your process. Keith will talk about that. So asset visibility is important, but analytics and reports to build specific solutions for your specific customer, again, for your customers, for your needs. The reason why your business is successful is because you do things slightly different than other carriers, other providers that are out there. So how you use data can be as unique as your company. So get data, use it as you see it to help improve your business, and that's a kind of a good overview on how data can help you move your business forward. And let's talk about Matson.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Christopher. Those are all really great points. So switching gears a little bit, as I referenced before, Matson recently adopted telematics technology on our 53-foot container fleet. So I'll talk to you a little bit about our experience, and I'll start here with what really drove us to implement asset intelligence technology were three things. The first one, I think as an industry and certainly at Matson, we're focused on technology. And in our role as an IMC and as a broker, we're really built as a three-legged stool. One, the first leg, we exist absolutely because of our customers. Two, we rely on our carriers and vendors to move our customers' freight. And three, the third leg, we depend on our employees to coordinate the logistics between those two and deliver on our service. And the really great thing about the asset intelligence technology is it benefits all three of those groups. So that's one. Number two is improving our asset utilization by receiving information faster. It does two things for our economics. One, it lowers our equipment cost. If we're able to save time by getting information faster and reload the box faster, that means less expense of the box sitting at a parking depot or two sitting on a chassis. We recover that equipment cost. But we also increase our effective fleet capacity, getting a day back and increase our fleet capacity in the neighborhood of 6 to 8%. So it allows us to service more of our customers' loads while also lowering our equipment cost. And the third one is really improving our operating efficiency. Although when it comes to our operating efficiency, I really go back to those three groups I've got there: our customers, our carriers, and employees. The operating efficiency, I think, is felt by all three. Because without cargo sensor technology, someone has to call or email to determine if a container is empty or loaded. And by automating that through the asset intelligence technology and integrating it with our TMS, We cut a lot of that work out of the existing process.
Hey, Keith, if I could, I'll just kind of step in here and ask you some questions along the way about your implementation of the technology. Matson Logistics wasn't always an asset-owning company. Why did you acquire some containers, and why now for technology? Why was the time right for you to implement some technology in your fleet?
Yeah, great question, Christopher. Really two questions. So I'll start with the first one. The main reason, there's probably a list of reasons, but I would say that the primary reason why we began our fleet in 2012 was really to create more capacity options for our customers, capacity in terms of the rail networks that we then enable them to access, as well as incremental supply that we control that we can then customize into our service offering with the customer. So the biggest reason why we adopted our own private container program in 2012 was about creating options for our customers. The second part of that, and that kind of ties into that story, is when we began our private 53-foot fleet in 2012, we started with 200 containers, and at the time, that was a smaller and less complex network than we have now. We did evaluate kind of the technology options in the marketplace, particularly the location. We looked at cargo sensor technology, but at the time, the economics versus the incremental information we would receive, we weren't able to align those two together. But since then, really what's happened is we've expanded our fleet considerably. Our network has really grown. It's become more complex. Two, I would say our customers have become much more focused on more real-time information to drive their supply chains. Three, the technology has really evolved. As you referenced when you were talking through the evolution of the technology, even over the last 2 or 3 years, the technology has really gotten much more improved where we're able to better utilize it. And finally, the economics for that technology in terms of lower data plans and the overall economics of the solution have gotten better to push us in that direction.
Thanks, Keith. One more question before we go on. What were some of your concerns going into the deployment of technology, and are you more comfortable now that you're into it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of that segues into my next slide. So some of our key considerations around that, and I'll talk to that in a second, really where are we going to get the value, because that's really what we're teeter-tottering on in terms of a balance, the economics of the solution versus the value and efficiency of that incremental information that enables our team, our customers, and our carriers to operate in a better way. That was our primary concern. Where are we going to really see the ROI that we expected on it?
Okay.
So expounding a little bit on what I just said, some of our key considerations were, one, the hardware, GPS absolutely for the location, but critical for us, we knew in any solution that we would move forward was having the asset intelligence, what's really going on with the cargo in the container was a key requirement for us because we needed to know empty load. We know customers are interested in events like door open, door close. So having the sensors in the container were just as important as having the location information. Two was having hardware that was durable and rugged. Intermodal service means lots of moving parts, lots of interesting weather. So we wanted to have hardware that would last a long time. And related to that was the battery life, having a battery that would service. So when we implemented the solution, it would be something we'd be able to use for a long time. And finally was an easy installation on the hardware. Part of that's cost, and part of that is not impacting our operational flows when we would stop a container to have the hardware installed on the container. Number two was the software. Our two big requirements there were, one, a user-friendly interface so our team members could begin using it without really any training. And even more importantly was integration with our TMS. It critically had to be something that could integrate with our in-house TMS. So in the event information, the data that we're tracking, is it empty at the consignee, is it empty at the depot, would automatically post without the need for any of our team members to do any of the manual data entry. And the last one, as I already mentioned, was the value, the real scale for us, the balance between the economics of the solution and the value and efficiency of the incremental information that we're getting down the street was the ultimate deciding factor. And like I already mentioned, we saw that occur as the technology has advanced over the last few years.
Excellent, Keith. And during the implementation process, were there any lessons learned you can share with the group? And what did you find during the implementation process?
Yeah, one interesting one was the geofences. When we initially deployed it, we plotted the geofences for our depots and our customer facilities and our carrier yard locations within a certain radius of their address. And then when we turned the solution live, we started getting some interesting data. I'll give you one example. One of our depots is located right off the I-55, the Stevenson Expressway here in Chicago. And when we turned the solution on, we started getting data that a container had in-gated and then out-gated 5 seconds later because the geofence was extending over the tollway, which is kind of interesting. So one thing we learned is definitely, we had to go back and replot, which is really easy in the interface that we're using Google Maps, replot the geofence around the locations that we have so that we're getting more accurate data. That was probably one of the biggest, might seem like a trivial thing, but it's a little tricky. That was probably one of the most interesting things we got when we turned the system live.
Okay. Yeah, the GPS and the geofencing, that's an important part for any solution to make sure you have accurate data. Drawing out the geofences on the mapping user interface, like you said, is fairly simple, but it's important to drive reporting and data accuracy. So, yeah, well said. How'd you find the install of the units?
Yeah, I guess that was another slightly tricky thing. The installation went really smooth. Most of our depots were able to accommodate us and work through the installation. Part of the balancing act, like I already mentioned, was we didn't want to impact our operational flow, so it was a matter of getting into a depot, getting it installed, and back on the street, so we didn't impact any customer traffic. And the final thing is, as we got to the last few units, then it became a matter of getting the containers to where the hardware was at. The first bulk of it, goes quickly because they're all coming in and they all haven't been installed. But as we got to the last tranche of them, it was about getting the container to where the hardware was located.
Thanks, Keith.
So key benefits we've experienced so far. One, what we're really tracking, there's a lot of data coming in and we're still exploring how we can best use that, again, to enable those three legs of the stool I mentioned. But some of the most critical events we're getting is, one, arrival and departure at our container depots, 2, arrival departure events at our customer facilities, and 3, empties at our customer facilities in terms of drop pools. Those events are critical to how we operate, or what our carriers need, what our customers need, and we're receiving all those events. They're being automatically populated in our system. Number 2 benefit is improvement in our asset utilization. So what we saw in our pilot program, and now as we've integrated the solution, we're beginning to see across the greater fleet, was over a day of use per container improvement. So as we're getting that information faster, that this container is empty at customer's drop pool at the consignee, or it's empty at a depot, or it's empty at a carrier yard, all that enables us to reload the container faster and improve our utilization. And over a day of use, like I say, really increases our effective fleet size by 6 to 8%. Last one is the operating efficiency. Again, like I said, without cargo sensor technology, it's human beings, communicating between us, the carrier, and the customer about is a container empty, is it loaded, and the technology really enables us to digitize that and make all three of those groups.
Yeah, and Keith, some of that's hard to put a hard ROI on, as you have their reduced calls, emails with customers, carriers, and container yards. Some of that, what might be considered softer ROI than some of the hard ROI you talked about earlier relative to overall fleet utilization and improvement in your asset utilization. Do you have a feel for how much of the savings is hard ROI versus other ROI factors that are a little harder to put quantitative numbers to?
Yeah, it's a great question. And on that second group, the qualitative part, because it is hard to calculate, that becomes, I think it's a big number, but it's hard to calculate. So in terms of the hard ROI, we can absolutely measure as our utilization improves if we're saving over a day of time per container on the effective use of it. Well, we can calculate, well, that meant this much less parking cost at one of our container depots, or it meant this much chassis expense sitting out on the street. And we can also numerically quantify, it meant this many more loads we were able to service to our customers in terms of revenue. So that hard ROI is there, but the soft one, I think, is it's an interesting number. But what we've really done by making our teams more efficient, by not having to do a lot of those manual data entry inputs and taking out some of the phone calls and emails, I don't know what that number is. And it's also not just Matson, it's also our customers and carriers that will be reaping benefits from that. So I'm not exactly, again, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I think it's a sizable number and there's a lot of gain there.
Excellent.
So on the future of asset intelligence, and Christopher, I'll ask you to weigh in on the large part of this because you're in a much better position to talk about the ongoing evolution of where the technology will be in the future, algorithms, data, all of those things. The only thing I wanted to comment on here was really our ongoing focus with our experience with it. So as we think about next steps of asset intelligence and what are we going to do with it, it's really about enhanced integration. We're having ongoing conversations and want to continue to explore that with our customers and how the data we're receiving can assist them in their supply chains. Same conversation with our carriers as we're receiving information. How can that help them better plan for pool management or other data events that they need visibility to? And to the latter point I've got on there is the better use of data in using that to drive exception management activities, more dynamic issues to enable both our team and ultimately our customer of any delay issues and change in planning.
And from our perspective, part of the future is, I believe, it's the ease of implementation and the ease of use of any technology solution. So sometimes as providers, we have to make it easy for the customers to implement and easy to utilize. So we're going to continue to focus on that. But as you indicated, the exception management and a focus on providing flexibility to customers to get the data that they want to use in their unique operations. I just want to keep talking about that every carrier, every shipper, every provider has a little bit different needs. So any technology solution has to have some flexibility to be able to give the end users data that they want and can use to effectively use in their operations. So on the hardware side and around asset intelligence, we've delivered a hub gateway solution that can tie into sensors around the container or the trailer or the asset. Like you've deployed, cargo sensing is one big important sensor, but there's also sensors around the chassis like tire pressure monitoring and other sensors, weight sensors. So there's a whole suite of sensors that we can't, maybe even aren't aware of, that will be coming out in the future that can integrate. If it can integrate into a hub, you can keep costs down, keep deployment simple, easy, lower cost, easy to implement, and with an upside to build out, I think is a big important part of the future of asset intelligence. So I think the reporting, the data usage is going to continue to be built out to get more value out of solutions that you've deployed. So that's my view on it right now, Keith.
Great, makes sense.
Okay, so maybe just a couple more questions. You've talked a lot about these things that are listed out here, the goals of your project, what you found through implementation and impact on operations and service improvements. Have you received feedback from customers or internally? What kind of feedback have you received from implementing this technology solution?
Yeah, I'll talk to both ends, the internal and the external. On the internal side, because the first step of our implementation is really about taking in that intelligence and populating our system with it. And as it comes into the system, it automatically goes into the reports and the metrics and the portal visibility that our customers can access in terms of container arrival, container departure. It's really automating and fulfilling those events within our existing structure. So on the internal side, I would say both at our customer service level and in our capacity management team level, it's qualitative at this point, but they're definitely really excited about receiving that information, not having to go out and get it from other sources, and seeing it come into the system and be able to make quicker, better, faster decisions in relation to that information. As it relates to the external, we are sensing a lot of excitement from our customers and getting a lot of inquiries to discuss it further on how they can use that solution. And different customers, to I think the point you made, are going to want different things. They've all got different commodities, different networks, different needs. So we don't see it as being a one-size-fits-all. But now that we have the power of all this data, it'll be best how do we use that data to provide the information that each of our customer needs.
Good stuff, Keith. Thank you. One of my last questions will be were there many unexpected findings? I believe that you don't know what you don't know until you implement a technology solution. So were there some surprises along the way or some things you found that you weren't aware of that now that you have some visibility into these assets? Are you finding some unexpected things?
Well, the one I already gave away earlier, which goes with that graphic you've got there, which I think is really good and kind of highlights my point. What was the geofences? You know, again, like with the geofences extending over certain rail tracks, certain highways. Some of the cases, even our rubber crosstowns, we were getting event data that wasn't necessarily what we were expecting, and we've identified how to correct that so we are getting the most accurate data. So certainly fine-tuning the geofences was one. And two, working with our carriers on receiving some of those empty notifications. The implementation of our solution was as a container is empty as a drop pool, it not only alerts us, it also alerts our delivery carriers at the same time that the box is ready for pickup. So fine-tuning our operational process for them to work through that is something actually we're still working through at this point.
Okay. So I know it's fairly early on. Are you satisfied with the solution and your rollout?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we just very recently implemented the solution, so we still have some learnings, some fine-tuning, and some things we're working through. But so far, the experience has been extremely positive. The data we have access to, the feedback from our internal teams, and kind of like I already referenced, some of the interest from our customer base has all been extremely positive.
Thank you, Keith. I have a summary here to talk about some of the advantages of asset management. It goes around utilization, visibility, customer service. One thing we didn't talk about, maybe because there's little maintenance on a container, but there's big impact from asset management around the maintenance of a trailer and chassis. So mileage reporting is standard within typical solutions. These are some of the things you can expect from implementing an asset management solution. Reducing theft is an important factor that you should expect with some security we talked about. So those are just some of the value equations from asset management I think people on the call can expect, and anybody who deploys this solution should expect. I think, Cal, we're at the point where maybe we can take some questions.
Yeah, that's great. Well, first of all, thanks, gentlemen. That was terrific. We definitely have some questions from the audience. What kind of security features do these devices have to prevent theft and damage, to ensure data privacy? Asking for a little bit of nuance in terms of the security features that these systems can offer.
Of course, location by itself provides some security. I know many customers that have security just built around the location functionality, that you can get an alert if a asset leaves the yard unexpectedly. You can build geofences around regions, that if an asset travels outside of your region, that you can be alerted that, hey, I'm not serving the Pacific Northwest, yet one of my assets is up there. So there's a lot of security that can be built around location-based security. You can create a geofence that is a high theft area, and you never want one of your assets to go in that area. So you can build alerts in that area. In addition, the devices themselves have tamper detection capabilities for security as well. And then there's the whole data privacy and data security side of it also. We leverage BlackBerry history and legacy in cybersecurity. As a cybersecurity and security-based company, we've got our technology built into the devices and the communication protocol itself, as well as things on the privacy and user interface side to ensure data and customer information is secure as well.
That's great, Christopher. The only thing I would add to that, because you had an expansive list, is, as Christopher mentioned, we can draw geofences around our shipper and consignee facilities, and then what you can set up is exception management to that data. So, for example, since the sensors have door open and door close data events, if the door opens outside of the shipper or the consignee, that can trigger an event that door shouldn't be opening, obviously, if it's not the shipper or the consignee.
That's great. Here's sort of a follow-on. Unintentionally a follow-on question from where you left off there, Keith. In terms of other kinds of data that you're looking currently and then over time to capture in terms of what these sensors can deliver, what kinds of information are you keen to capture from these systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I mentioned, Hal, part of that we'll discover and learn as we have more and more dialogues with our customers on what's important to them. Our current solution has obviously the GPS, the cargo sensor technology, door open, door close, but it also has a lot of sensors around what's happening inside the container with temperature, humidity, pressure. And we're receiving all of that data, but we're not really using it at this point. But we think that's part of the dialogue that we'll have with our customers on, is that of use to them to receive all of those other sensor inputs? And is there anything outside of the suite of sensors we're already getting that we can implement in the future? But I think a lot of that will be borne out as we have more and more dialogues with our customer base.
Great. In terms of tire pressure monitoring, is that pulling from an auto inflation system, and this is if it's being used, or actual tire pressure?
Well, that is dependent on what the customer has deployed. Both solutions provide some wireless connectivity capabilities to our gateway, so the customers that have a chassis or a trailer will select which solution they prefer. As we know, there's both different flavors of tire pressure systems and tire inflation systems, so it's really up to the customers to select which solution best fits their needs, but those solutions provided by other third parties have connectivity capabilities to asset monitoring.
Got it. Here's a question. Does the utilization data that you're getting or interested in tell you how much the container is utilized or whether it's just loaded or not?
Yeah, there's different technology, and Christopher's in a better position to talk about the different solutions that are available in the market. The one we're using is able to detect the percentage of freight. So when the door closes, it knows what basically is the 100% line for what's in the container. And then it can count down. So is it 80% full, 70% full, 40% full, down to 10% full, and then eventually empty. So on one hand, you have binary, is it empty or loaded, is a fundamental question. But yeah, I definitely think there's value in know the percentage of empty. And I'll let Christopher talk to any of the technology pieces.
Hal, if I understood the question correctly, utilization can mean different things to different people. So Keith accurately described cargo utilization inside a container or trailer. How effective are you utilizing your capacity? And then there's also the utilization relative to movement. And even that can be measured by distance or by time. So we do both. We measure how many miles your asset is being utilized, and then how much time is the asset being utilized. So 24 hours in a day, that asset moving 25% of the time, 15% of the time, or 40% of the time. So utilization can be measured in those ways also. So again, the customer can decide what works for them relative to the utilization, but miles is certainly one way of measuring utilization, but time out of a 24-hour day or out of a month is another effective way of measuring utilization. How much are your assets actually being utilized? And frankly, we see some information that many customers are surprised at how little utilization they get out of their high-value assets that, they invest heavily in. Trailers, chassis, containers, they're not cheap. And the more you can use them, the more effective you can be as a business.
Amen to that. Just a quick question around some of the specifics of the technology. Are there sensors available that can measure load weight and load shifting en route and give the driver an alert?
That's a good question. I think that technology is still in development. There are third parties out there that have sensors that measure the weight. Technologies that are available, like a gyroscope or an accelerometer, can measure things like fast acceleration or sway. So the capabilities are there and built in to it. So it's a matter of really just kind of building out that solution. And all the solutions are dependent on customer requests. And what customers want, solution providers will deliver to.
Makes sense. Here's a good one. Keith, could you describe a little bit about your process of how you settled on a mapping software and kind of what you went through to aid in the visual display of the information that you were looking to capture and track?
Yeah, great question, Hal. So going back to earlier my slide deck, one of the things that I referenced as we were looking at key considerations for the solution we wanted to use, one was obviously integration with our TMS, but the second one was the user interface. And so the user interface we're using is already built in with a Google Maps view screen where you can zoom in on an address and then draw the lines of the geofence around the property location. So a lot of it's already built into the package.
Cool. This one is related. For dynamic ETAs, which I think people are really fascinated about, are you doing that when a container is just on the road or as well as when it's on the rail? Do you have the capability to track when they're on the rail?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when the container's on the rail, we are receiving information from the railroad via EDI where the container is at, and most of the railroads also transmit dynamic ETAs to us. We're now able to receive additional information from the GPS sensor on where it is in terms of the train and use that to forecast, when it arrived in addition to the rail EDI. But a lot of that information, when it's on the rail, I would say dominantly we're still using the railroad's information, and where the GPS device has really enabled us with incremental information is when it outgates from the rail and it's out on the street is where we're seeing the most power of the information.
Here's one that just came in that kind of loops in there a little bit. What, if any, information, and I know it's early on, but what kind of information and feedback are you getting from truck drivers about the new system?
Yeah, that part's really in its infancy. We recently had our Carrier of the Year event here in Chicago and talked to our main best carriers about the solution, and we received a lot of interest and some questions and some positive feedback on how we can use that information better together. But as we're still really beginning the process of enabling them with some of that visibility to better use drop pool management, we don't have a lot of direct feedback, but certainly a lot of interest in how they can use it to be more efficient as well.
That's great.
Hey, Hal, I'll say on our side also, making the life of a driver easier is a big part of our value equation. And eliminating driver wasted time chasing for trailers or chassis and containers is what drives us. That's a big part of our mission, is to allow drivers to get into a yard, find the trailer that's loaded and ready to go, find the maps and container, connect and go and use their available hours on the road driving versus searching for containers. So that's a big part of our value equation. As a matter of fact, part of our solution has an ability to share a link to send a driver right to their asset. So to use a mobile phone or a smart device, we can route drivers to an asset to eliminate that wasted time, and that's what I'm sure Keith and Mattson are going to be using the technology for us to eliminate wasted time for all their carriers and partners as well.
Speaking of which, here's a good one. When a device is on a chassis, can it tell the driver what parking spot the chassis is in the intermodal terminal?
My answer is yes. That our GPS accuracy is very good, and the way the asset management system works is that asset is at that location until it moves. So yes, and I just described this unique asset sharing link that we have that you could send to a driver to go pick up a chassis or a trailer or any radar equipped asset, and it'll navigate the driver to that location. And if it happens to move while they're en route, that link gets updated and advises the driver that asset has moved. So yes, in fact, you can send a driver to find a chassis in a yard. And not only that, what end of the yard is it at, down to fairly accurate capabilities of where that asset is sitting.
The only thing I would add to that, our solution we installed on our containers, not on the chassis, but the aim with the carriers is the same, making them more productive so that they know they're going to a drop yard, they know that container is empty, and where it's located in a yard, I think, is also a key factor, because all those things, saving the driver time, making them more productive is going to increase their satisfaction, their retention, and make our overall service better. So even though our solution is on the container sits atop the chassis, and using that information to enable the carriers is a big takeaway.
That's great. Here's a really interesting one. How do you see these kinds of systems helping resolve disputes over things like loads arriving late, chassis issues, disputes over usage, detention, demurrage, things like that? Do you see these systems helping provide some backup for dispute resolution?
Yeah, I definitely do. We're still thinking through how best to use that, but the data is there. We've got the location trail. So was the driver really sitting at the facility for 2 hours? Right now, that might be ambiguous, right? If the consignee or a depot and the carrier are giving different reference points. But if the location data trail is saying, sure enough, he arrived at 10 o'clock and left at 11:30, then you've got hard evidence and a location trail of what really transpired on that interchange.
Yeah, and I'll just add there, Hal, and Keith, that there's hard ROI there and soft ROI in that there's detention capabilities for recovering wasted time at a drop yard, and there's also dispute resolution, as you described it, adjudication, the ability to prove that the driver and the asset was there at specific times, when it entered a geofence, when it left. It's all data. So now you can get rid of he said, she said, dispute resolution conversations and get to the facts and then settle any issues very quickly and eliminate wasted time and move on to doing business.
That's great. We can all appreciate that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
A number of questions around how do you see artificial intelligence helping with your decision-making process as it becomes more available?
That sounds like it came from a technology provider. There's a lot to be talked about as far as blockchain and artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I think that there's a lot that can be done on the high end for high volume, large utilizers of technology, around patterns and pattern recognition, to be able to predictive modeling. So there's a lot to be done in that area that can help our industry and help improve the fluidity of the supply chain, around those areas. So the start of it is to start capturing the data, I believe. We can't get to machine learning and improve predictive analytics and predictive ETA or predictive breakdowns or any kind of predictive modeling pointed at any target until we have volumes of data. So I think it starts with getting good data, having accurate data, and then the capabilities are out there for machine learning, predictive modeling, to start doing things around predictive breakdowns, predictive ETAs, predictive interruptions in the supply chain. So there's a lot, and particularly in intermodal, where there's so many variables and so many factors impacting the supply chain. Machine learning predictive modeling has a place here.
I'm probably just saying the same thing Christopher is in a slightly different way. Yeah, I think that's the power of the future of machine learning is the predictive analytics. If we can better predict our supply in a particular market, if we can better predict our demand in a particular market, that's going to drive improvements. And similarly, for disruptions or delays in the supply chain, machine learning can help us, better enable dynamic ETAs and look for those issues and be proactive to react and adjust to any issues that surface.
Thank you, Keith and Christopher. There was a wealth of information you shared with us today, and I think we all gleaned a great deal from it. I look forward to keeping this discussion going. I'd also like to thank our sponsor of this webinar and the Business Intelligence Service Series, BlackBerry Radar. For more information about topics like this, IANA membership, how to get engaged, or our programs, please visit intermodal.org or feel free to email us at info@intermodal.org. Thanks for joining us at IANA, the connecting force behind intermodal freight.